What's up, everybody? It's Magic Sports Guy coming at you today. Not prepared much in a hotel room with my man Jeff K. Collins, the Hefe, the one and the only NBA expert on Halloween. What's up, Hefe?
What is up, dude? What are you dressing up as for Halloween?
I am dressing up as, I know, not to bum you out, but I've been really busy lately because my dog has cancer. So I'm in a hotel next to the radiation place. It's her last treatment. Hopefully things are looking good. So that's what I'm doing tonight. I'm hanging with the dog.
Well, that's good.
Yep.
Have some quality time with the dog. That's good.
So
I'm
yep,
too old to dress up for Halloween anyway, man. I'm not dressing up. I'm gonna try to avoid trick-or-treaters.
But it is a little bit sad because Halloween is an amazing night in San Diego. Because as you know, there are quite a lot of sites downtown that you may
You
be
mean
interested
girls?
in. Yeah,
Yes.
pretty much girls.
Yes. I
Oh,
do
that's
know
right.
that.
We're the elite.
Yeah.
We can talk about these things, right?
That's right.
All right. So we're gonna break down some hoops. I'm obviously in full blown NFL mode, as you know. So I'm going to rely on you to be our expert, and which is why you are with the company. So that's probably a really good idea.
I can tell that you're in NFL mode by how much money you've been winning.
Dude, I had another good weekend. I did.
Crazy, dude. I told you, I barely missed out on some Qs. I finished third in one, second in the other. One was an early slate Q that I lost in the last second in overtime with the Raiders game. I was like, can anything break my way, dude? But hopefully variance will be on the right side for me eventually, and I'll see you at that Playboy Live final.
It was a good day to have multi-entries because obviously, I loved Ware, and he was just. I mean, he was on 82% of my teams, I think. So
he was on both of those for me. Huh?
It was the 18% that drove all the winnings. So anyway, yeah, let's move on to some hoops. What's going on, company-wise, logistically in the hoops world right now at DFS Elite, Fantasy Guru Elite? What does Tommy like to call it? Lots of other things. But
something Elite Mafia. That's what we are. Elite Mafia.
There we go.
Yeah, well, this is obviously the last day that we are doing the early bird specials. So I got a lot of questions on Twitter from NFL subscribers saying, hey, does that mean that I need to re-sign up again? It's like, yeah, I mean, we're doing all the sports separately. So if you have an NBA or an NFL subscription, we've been giving you the NBA content for free for the last week or so, just because we wanted to show you guys how awesome it was. Like, it's one thing for us to say, look, our optimizer is the best in the world, basically. No one else is going to touch our projections, and we've got really good analysis. And then to actually show the people, like last week, our optimizer didn't lose on FanDuel. Depending on when you ran it, some people lost once on FanDuel, and it was around 50% on DraftKings. And we've got Thad on shows touting guys that no one's ever heard of where he watched play in the Olympics and stuff. And I'm doing a breakdown every day, except Sundays, and doing some cheat sheets when we have the bigger slates. Like our NBA product is the best out there. So we wanted to show our NFL subscribers and other people that, look, it's everything we're saying it is. So that's why they've seen it. This is the last chance to get the early bird special. That means 45% off. Like, it's a big deal. After that, we're going back up to the normal pricing, and there's not going to be a way to get it. So highly encourage people to sign up today as opposed to tomorrow. You're going to save a lot of money.
Yeah, the alert system I know has been pumping out stuff today, like really accurately and then on time. At first, we did updates and injuries. We now just basically have it pared down to not hit your box so many times. So it's really just the most important stuff. But if you look to see it, like when those alerts are coming out, I'm going to guess Rob's going to have them as fast as anybody in the industry by the time he's done. Because he's also the guy kind of controlling the algorithm. So our tech is going to be sick. We're also talking to a guy and hopefully bringing him on board who's going to do some high-end statistical analysis. So, yeah, our NBA product is dope. I'm excited. I'm just going to ride your coattails all year, dude.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of pressure, and I was, heading into the season, I'm going, man, like Tommy's talking me up a lot. I know, I've got the reputation as an NBA guy, and like I need to come out strong. And sure enough, like we are coming out strong, so I feel good about it. But it's been awesome. And regarding those news alerts, those are going to improve as well. Like you said, we're tweaking those a little bit.
Yep.
I think they're a little ambiguous right now. Like the reports usually says the guy is day to day, and we want to like get you guys some clarification. Like, look, he's out for this game, and look, here's the guy who's going to be his replacement. But we're working to that. Like, we're still just kind of testing out the first week when everything's free, and we should have everything quite a bit better now as we move everything behind the paywall.
Yep. And so, yeah, today is it for Guru subscribers and general public to get the 45% off. So definitely want to do that. And let's stop selling the shit and let's talk some hoops, my man.
Let's do it.
So point guard. I mean, it's a 4-game slate, but it's an intriguing slate to me just because you got some teams that play, high pace, up tempo basketball. Point guard alone has some really nice looking names in the list. Who are you targeting? Let's go. How do you do this? Usually go high end, obviously, and then work to your way to value, or how do you like to do it?
I mean, I'm kind of a head case, so I just jump around all over the place. But yeah, if you want to try to rein me in, then we could try to break it down by interest level or dollar amount. But let me start off with Jeremy Lin because he's the guy I think is just an automatic play right now. I sent out some tweets earlier about Jeremy Lin and his production so far early on in the season. It basically grades out higher than it did during his season with the New York Knicks, where Lin's sanity was tapped and everything, where he was playing out of his mind and people were coming to New York to watch him from all over the world. Like that, he's playing at a higher fantasy level right now than he was then. And it's really impressive what he's doing in this offense. It's basically all running through him. He's scoring the ball. He's doing a good job of distributing. He had 10 assists in his last game, 9 assists the game before that. In his first 2 games, he had 18 and 19 actual points. His fantasy production has been ridiculous. It's been 26.1, 45.3, 32.6 on FanDuel, which means it's even higher on DraftKings. Came close to a triple-double against Indiana. Like the matchup is against Rajon Rondo, who's not a good defender. Like this guy is the #1 auto play. You just put him in your lineup and build around him.
And that for a GPP, let's say you have 5 lineups. How many Jeremy Lin shares are you having in those 5 lineups?
6.
Okay, fair enough.
No, really though, 5. I'm going all in on Jeremy Lin. I think that's the right play today. There's some other guys that we're going to talk about at other positions where their usage may be due for regression, or there are guys that are going to be scoring dependent that might be a good fade that are going to be highly owned. Jeremy Lin is a guy that I think it's the wrong move to fade him today.
All right, cool. But down there, I know Ty Lawson is also going to be very popular, right? Because he's been kind of running the show in Sacramento now and has looked pretty good. I mean, kind of little Ty Lawson resurgence, right?
Exactly. So Ty is a guy that is also playing a bunch of minutes, 36, 36, 34 in his first 3 games to start out the season. That's really good. His usage rate isn't going to be at the same level as Lin's, so you're not going to expect as much out of the guy. But when a guy's 5,100 on FanDuel and he's playing point guard and he's playing mid-30s minutes, like he's going to be one of the top plays. So I like him quite a bit. I don't love his matchup or anything, but being a short slate, I think that he's squarely in play as one of the better point guard options.
Interesting, because then, that takes you to 2 value plays on FanDuel, which is great because there's like DeMarcus Cousins and places where you can go ahead and spend that money. But it makes you have to fade a guy like Kyle Lowry, who our optimizer has as the best value play at the position, even though he's higher priced. And I really like to find those combinations. And I know Benny's going to hop on and talk a little bit about the optimizer, but when you see someone who's like 10 grand, 8 grand, 9 grand, who also scales out as one of the best value plays on the board, that really kind of grabs my eye when I'm looking through the player pool on the optimizer. So talk to me about Kyle Lowry at home, only $7,400 on DraftKings.
No doubt. Yeah, I think that's a great point in identifying value. It's a lot more valuable when a guy's going to hit a 5x multiple or something when the guy's more expensive. Yep. So that's how Lowry is grading out. He's grades out well in models today because of his past performance. Like last year, he was a very good point guard, one of the more underrated point guards in the league, in my opinion. He shed a few pounds, ended up becoming a really solid defensive player as well. Problem is he struggled a bit in the playoffs. He struggled a bit to start the year off. So he played 38 and 39 minutes in his first 2 games, both solid matchups for him. And he way underperformed. So I like him. I have interest in him. I think this is possibly his best matchup yet at home against Emmanuel Mudiay, a guy who's very turnover prone, a rookie who can't defend well. Like, this is a really good spot for Lowry to go off. It's just a matter of, I think Lynn is certainly the better option, but I don't mind Lowry mixing him in there because he certainly has upside if he's going to play close to 40 minutes.
Right. Well, just looking at like on DraftKings, I mean, I could see easily playing 3 point guards. Am I wrong?
Yeah, oh yeah. I think in general that's a good approach, and then just factoring in today's slate, that's a great approach. Yeah, I think 3 point guards or 2 centers.
Center's the other place. Yep.
Yeah, that's how I prefer to do it. Looks like we got Benny now, huh?
Hey, what's up, guys? What's going on?
Benny.
Yeah, I just got into the studio, so I just signed on. I saw your message over there.
Is that a New York building right behind you? Look at that.
Yeah, I'm actually right around the corner from Madison Square Garden on 35th Street between 7th and 8th Ave.
Awesome. I miss New York. I stayed there a few weeks over the summer and like fell in love with the place. Wanted to move there, man.
Yeah, it's not a bad little town. It's good nightlife for a single guy like you, so I could see why you would like it.
Oh yeah. Between there and Nashville, man, like I had a good summer.
Yeah, I hear good things about Nashville actually.
Oh yeah.
So have you?
At first, why would I want to go to Nashville? I'm like, well, because there's like millions of really hot girls, dude. Like, and they're usually really drunk.
I'm married,
yeah,
so
well,
it doesn't make a difference to me at this point.
Right.
Yeah, don't hate, dude. You know, some of us still have to act like we're 30 even though we're 40. Like, that's me. So all right, so we were running down point guard. We just got to Lowry, who is one of the best value plays on the optimizer, even though he's a $7,400 player. And we were talking about that kind of really stands out when you see one of a good player, low priced, good projection. But then there's also these value plays like what are the 2 guys that you were on?
Lynn. I like Lynn a lot.
Yeah, I
Benny
love
likes
Jeremy.
Lynn, too.
I love Jeremy Lin today. Yeah, I love Jeremy Lin today. I think. See, the thing that people were worried about with him after the first game, he only played about 27 minutes. But the last 2 games, he bumped it up to like 32 and 34. And he's basically producing, at about a point a minute. So at 6,300, if you're getting him at 32, 34 minutes, you're expecting, probably 30, 35 fantasy points. That's a pretty good return for him at that price. So
And
I like him a
Vasquez is
lot
out too, right?
Yeah,
I think
so he may, and that's the other thing is he may even see closer to 35 minutes this game or even more, which again is only gonna help him because with the ball in his hand, he's a guy that you can count on for about a fantasy point a minute.
Right, because there's like Grievous Vasquez who's out. Who else do they even play behind him right now, Jeff?
Well, I mean, Foye might be out too, right?
Yeah, Randy Foy's out. Vasquez is out. They're probably going to use that kid Whitehead a little bit, but in reality, like Jeremy Lin's going to play most of the minutes. I think it's going to be close to 40 even, and it's 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. Like that's
huge.
A lot of points. It's a lot of
huge.
points. So.
Yeah. So I actually love Jeremy Lin. I think he's a guy. I have him in my FanDuel team and my DraftKings team. I've come down from Lowry in the optimizer to Jeremy Lin in a lot of cases, and that frees up some money for you where you can use somewhere else to upgrade something else that you didn't like.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say before you go on the optimizer thing later is just wait till later in the day to run it, guys. Like, do not run it at 10 in the morning because it just really doesn't have the data needed to give you a quality lineup at that time.
Yeah, how much time do you have, Benny? Should we talk about the optimizer stuff now, or do you want to save it till later? Or what?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably here for about 20 minutes. I got I got to go do a show meeting probably about like 5:30, 5:40 whenever they come in and tell me they're ready.
Kevin, can we call an audible and talk about the optimizer for a minute?
Absolutely.
All right, so Benny and I were discussing earlier today with Rob, the guy that creates the optimizer, to see, it's super early. Like, we have a super small sample size, but curious why the FanDuel optimizer is doing a lot better than DraftKings. And Benny and I got into some good discussion, I think, about what makes FanDuel different than DraftKings. I would say that Benny has been better on DraftKings throughout his DFS career, and I've been better on FanDuel. So I was curious to get Benny's take on roster construction and how that relates to the optimizer, and maybe some tips you could give us for using the optimizer and constructing lineups on DraftKings.
Yeah, one of the big things that, Jeff and I were talking about earlier, and it might not sound like it's a big thing, but on FanDuel you get 9 spots. On DraftKings you only get 8. So it's a lot easier to take one of those cheap guys that only gets you 20 points on FanDuel than it is to do it on DraftKings, because you really need every guy in your lineup to get you a pretty good score. Now, if you have a guy, even if he's 3K and he goes 6X or 7X to get you 20, 21 points, if you want to get to like a 280 to 300 score to give yourself a good chance to cash in tournaments and be well above a cash line on any given night, that still leaves you about 260 to 280 points for the other 7 guys in your lineup to get. So you really need to have every one of those other guys you put in there get you, an average of between 35 and 40 fantasy points, which again, if we could pick out guys that are going to get us 35 to 40 fantasy points on any given night, we're going to be in a great spot. The problem is it's not always that easy, because those guys are usually the guys that are priced up at $8,000 or $9,000, where we're not going to be able to fit 7 of them into our lineups. One of the things that I was saying is, one of the ways that and again, you also have to see where everyone's coming from. Like what I said to Jeff is, the lineups that the optimizer are popping out over at DraftKings, it feels to be a little bit more stars and scrubsy, which is good if you're playing GPPs, because when all those guys hit, when you get 25 or 30 points out of your 3K guy, and you're also getting Anthony Davis 89, 90 points, or a Russell Westbrook 85, 90 points, those are the days when everything comes together that you put up a 340 and you wind up taking down a GPP. But on most days, and for what a lot of our subscribers are using the optimizer for, if you're playing in cash games, remember, we always preach safety in cash games. You want guys who, have safer floors. The optimizer looks at a projection, which the projection number, every guy has a range. So just take any one of the guys, for example, that's out there. Like, let's say Jeremy Lin. Tonight, Jeremy Lin, the optimizer might have him 33, 34 fantasy points. That doesn't mean that Jeremy Lin's going to score 33 or 34 fantasy points every time in a situation. He probably has a range of between 25 and 45 fantasy points. Now, the guys at the lower end who were, projecting for 18 to 22 fantasy points at, $3,000, their range is much narrower. In a good game for those guys, they're probably not going to get you past 25. In a bad game for them, they're probably not going to get lower than 12 or 15 because they're so low anyway. But putting a 12 or 15 on your roster is really going to hurt a roster that you have when you only have 8 spots worth of guys to score points. And what I was saying is, when you have guys like Boogie Cousins or Anthony Davis or Russell Westbrook, with them being so highly owned, if you're the guy who has Russell Westbrook at 40% and a guy on your roster that only scored 12 points, somebody else probably has a better combination of Russell Westbrook and one of those cheap guys. So what I like to do when I'm filling out the optimizer, I said to a couple people on Twitter today, the optimizer is not the be-all, end-all. You don't just hit optimize and put that lineup in and you're done for the day and you expect to win money.
I sort of disagree, though, here, Benny. Because you're talking about a 4-game sample size, right?
Right.
To me, if you're playing multiple entries, I agree with Benny 100%. But if you're playing one entry in cash games and you just want to be consistent with it, you just got to play the optimal. Because once you start fucking with it, you're deviating from the mathematics of the model.
I'm on Benny's side here.
Then you're screwing with your deviate. You're screwing with, okay, today I messed with it and I won. Tomorrow I didn't mess with it and then I lost. You see what I'm saying? You're gonna have. It's almost like trying to play the roulette with picking a defense. You know what I mean? It's damn it, if I would just stayed with the good defense every day, I would have gotten those days that I won. Whereas I'm trying to pick and choose my days. This day the optimizer is right. This day the optimizer isn't right. But isn't the whole point of playing a model literally taking the brain work out and just pushing?
Not in my opinion. I think that you are trying to identify, number one, the roster construction for the day that's most optimal. For instance, when we first the first day or two that we ran,
right,
it was plugging in rookies that, in my opinion, had no chance of reaching value. So I just stuck with the roster construction that it liked with the same expensive guys.
Okay.
And then I rotated out some of the value plays for guys that I had personally projected as higher point output. So
and if guys can do that with your
projection model,
but you're like Jeff Collins too. I'm talking about a guy gets off work in California or at 3:45 and he wants to quickly put it in the lineup.
Luckily I've got cheat sheets and rundown for everyone so people can identify those. But I think that with a projection model, like no one is assuming that it's perfect, right? Like for instance, the difference between the number 1 optimal lineup and the number 2 optimal lineup is going to be like 0.5. Not really sacrificing much.
It's just like my counter would be like the Theo Riddick. Like everyone was so up in arms that morning. Why the fuck is Theo Riddick in the optimizer? You know, and everyone, and he goes out and like scores like 27 fantasy points, and like so many people swapped off of him because they thought they were smarter than the optimizer, and it kind of like I see what you mean, Jeff, and that's what I meant about like literally even 2 lineups. Fine, I'm going to do one with my brain and one with the math only, but I would give it a little bit of time to get some data too.
Plus, think about it too. When you have 200 people using the same lineup, that's all of a sudden becomes suboptimal too. So we don't want everyone using the same lineup. But yeah, anyway, I think that is good discussion. It's not like black and white. You know, there's a lot of gray area around that. So Benny, any other thoughts on DK, FanDuel optimizers, and what you're seeing?
I mean, one other thing that I just wanted to throw out there. If you're playing cash games, you know, sometimes it's better not to go with the stars and scrubs kind of approach. Like you would, I feel as somebody who plays a lot of cash games on DraftKings that my lineups tend to be more in the mid-range. And what I mean by that is instead of putting in a 3K guy to fit in a 9K guy, you know, I tend to try to look for a guy in like the 4 or 5K range. So a couple examples today. You got guys like Jamal Crawford, I like, who's 4,100. You got guys like Trevor Booker at 47. You know, I've come up off of some of these $3,500 and $3,600 guys to those guys, and then you come down somewhere else. So, like, you know, we talked about Jeremy Lin before. Coming down from Lowry to Lin saves you that $1,100 or $1,200 that allows you to get up from a guy who's, you know, 3,500, 3,600 that you're not sure of, that, you know, probably has a ceiling of maybe 20, 22 points. Could get you onto a guy like a Trevor Booker, or like last week when we had Taj Gibson at like 4,100, you know, or guys in that range, that $4,300 to $4,700 range. You know, you can get those guys and they have a ceiling of higher than 22 to 25 points. So you're getting sometimes 28, 30, 35 points out of those guys. Maybe you're giving up a little bit by coming down from Lowry to Lin, but you're also picking up a much higher ceiling by coming up from some of those guys that are 3K. Because one of the other things that, you know, optimizers don't always take into account, you have some of those guys that are 3K that they're projecting for 18 to 22 fantasy points. They're probably only going to see 16 to 25 minutes worth of action. Whereas you can come up to a guy who's in that 4K range, like a Jamal Crawford seeing 30 minutes, or a Trevor Booker seeing 30 minutes, or, you know, some of the other guys that happen to be in that range today, where you're getting the extra minutes. So it gives you a little bit of a safer floor if you're playing cash games, because the more minutes that a guy's on the floor, the more opportunities he has to score. Now, it's not going to all of a sudden make a guy who's, 0.6 or 0.7 fantasy point per minute producer somebody who's going to score 2 fantasy points per minute like a Russell Westbrook. But having those extra couple minutes, you know, sometimes you luck into a rebound, or you luck into an open shot, or, you know, you pick up an extra steal or an extra block. And when you're able to do that for a guy who's still pretty cheap, you know, an extra steal, an extra block, an extra rebound for a guy who's 4K, you know, that takes a guy that's 5X up to 6X and gives you, you know, a little bit of a safer floor. So this way, because inevitably in your lineup, you have eight or nine guys in your lineup. There's always one guy that underperforms what you expected him to do. So if you have a couple of these other guys that are a little bit cheaper that outperform their expectations, you know, it makes up for the difference in the guys that underperform.
I think also too, you know, you can't buy the optimizer without a subscription to our articles and stuff. So by reading articles and everything, you're going to become a better player throughout the year, and you're going to start to identify certain guys that maybe aren't as good for cash games. So an optimizer might like him for how many points he's projected to score, but we might be able to teach people to identify guys that maybe have a higher bust rate, say like a Klay Thompson or something, who's going to rely on his shot. And we've talked about before on shows that, look, this guy has a chance to bust because if his shot isn't falling, it's not going to happen for him. Whereas Benny and I would come off of a Klay Thompson in cash game and use a guy that's a little bit safer, that maybe grabs some rebounds, has the ball in his hand a little more, can dish the ball off. And maybe when the optimizer spits out Klay Thompson, you see that Benny and I both like this other shooting guard that's a little more well-rounded. That's how you can come off the optimizer a little bit. So that's why I think it's a good tool. you know?
Yeah, especially this year on DraftKings with the multi-position eligibility, because sometimes you're able to get, I mean, Jeff and I both talked about one of the reasons we love point guards so much and want to try to put as many as we can into our lineups is, they're going to score a couple points, but they also rack up the assists, which are worth 1.5 points, which is pretty big, and they get the steals and stuff like that. So, occasionally at some point during the season, if Damian Lillard's hurt, you're going to be able to put CJ McCollum, who's going to be acting as the point guard that night, in the shooting guard spot on DraftKings. So his price and Clay's price are probably about the same. But if I'm playing cash, I feel safer knowing that I have CJ in there, because if Clay's shot's not dropping, he could give me a 22 as his final score. Even if CJ's not dropping on his shot, with the assist that he'll get and the extra minutes he'll get without a Lillard in there, he might be a guy that I would rather have in cash and maybe even in tournaments, because he has a safer floor and a safer ceiling. So, like I said, I mean, I love the optimizer. I use it to get an idea of my lineups, but I don't think you have to take it as, gospel. If there's a couple guys that you like better, or, situations where you think you can make a 2-for-2 swap, I usually wind up using 5 or 6 of the guys that are in there and wind up, moving around 1 or 2 pieces to try to get something else. And another thing too, like Jeff or like Kevin was saying, when you run it makes a big deal. Like the other day, it had Harden in there at the beginning, and then we found out the news that, LaMarcus Aldridge wasn't playing. So you were able to plug in at the power forward spot like a $4,000 David Lee, and then you could actually fit Harden and Westbrook into your lineup, because now Lee was projected for 24 or 25 after we found out the LaMarcus Aldridge news. So make sure you guys go back there and check it
early.
as often as
Wait
you
till
can.
like a month into the season, you guys. Wait till that's like carnage at that point. And if you run it at 2 o'clock, or I'm talking West Coast always when I talk times, people. Fucking East Coast. Then it's all about me. So like you're wasting your time, and you're really wasting your time. Especially then if you're gonna go like tweet about it, it's like you're even wasting more time. You could have just spent that 10 minutes like researching. I know if MLB model Rob was on here, I would have someone on my side in this argument, but we'll leave this alone, because to me he's a math guy. So once you deviate from the math, you're deviating from the model, and thus you're not really like playing the model itself. And the last thing I'll do, and then we'll get back to the picks, is the optimizer is just a tool that takes our projections, our player model. What you're purchasing really is the algorithm that we own. See, that's where, the Max Deluries, the Gandorfs, I know I'm not saying his name right, whatever the fuck his name is. Like those guys, like, sure, they have an optimizer, but it's their projections that lead them to all their victories. So that's really what you're buying here, is the projections. Swish optimizer just generates a lineup for you by mathematically taking said projections and putting them into the best categories to win, taking into things like Benny said, consistency. And sometimes it likes those 3,000 guys because it sees the upside of the 70-point Russell, and it realizes you can't really afford those guys otherwise. I think that's why I like those 3K guys, but I agree with you. Their standard deviation, their floors are so fucking low that you could get in a lot of trouble. So anyway, that was good optimizer talk. Jeff, do you have anything else before we move on back to picks?
No, man, I'm good.
All right, so we were on point guard. And
yeah, we're finishing up point guard.
We might have a bet, dude, because like the optimizer like Schrader or Schroeder.
Yeah.
Yeah, tomato. And it's not putting Jeremy Lin on the optimal in FanDuel. So do we have a side
anything you want?
Dennis Schroeder, however the fuck you say it, versus Jeremy Lin. I guess what is Jeremy Lin on? $500 or $200 more. I'm basically giving you money right now, aren't I?
Well, it's like the same price. I mean, I'll give you 0.2 if you want, or whatever.
I want it. All right, $500 done.
$500 done.
Okay.
Easy money.
Yeah, you just paid for a nice night out for Collins.
I know. What are we gonna do tonight, man? I'm spending that money before I even get paid for it.
2 quick fouls, please God, Jeremy Lin. 2 quick fouls.
Yeah.
Right.
But they don't even
Rondo,
have a backup. It's not like they have anybody they can put in.
Right? They're just gonna play anyway, huh?
Rondo's not gonna draw any fouls.
I'm just such a Jeremy Lin hater, dude. Just because I fucking hated him on the Lakers, dude.
No, he's bad on the Lakers, but he's good on the net. They just run everything through him.
So then I know Bledsoe also, like, I know, damn, I told you this position is stacked. He's got great BVP against the Clips. You got the narrative street against the Clips.
Mhm.
So talk to me about some Bledsoe, $7,400 on DraftKings.
I think he actually even gets
Excuse
a
me,
little bit of
FanDuel.
boost. I think he gets a little bit of a boost if Booker doesn't play. Booker's
Yep.
questionable right now, so
Correct.
we know that Booker takes a bunch of shots already, right? So those shots have to go somewhere in the offense, and it's probably going to go to Bledsoe. So I like him quite a bit if Booker is out. If he's not out, then I won't have a ton of interest just because of how deep the position is. That said, he's a fine tournament play, but Chris Paul is, the best point guard defender in the league.
My biggest concern though is how do you think they're going to match up if they have? Because let's say Booker doesn't play, like that's optimal situation for Eric Bledsoe. That means they're putting in Brandon Knight. Do you think that they'll leave Paul on Knight, or do you think they'll put Paul on Bledsoe? Because I know Bledsoe is listed as the point guard, but I mean, just like body wise, he's a little bit of a bigger guy and might play the two. I mean, I honestly think it's a bad matchup for whoever winds up having to guard the other one, because you're probably going to get JJ Redick defense on either Knight or, on Bledsoe. If you figure they leave Paul on Bledsoe, then I think Knight could have a really big game here. He's only like 5,500. If there's no Booker, he's going to have JJ Redick defense. And I mean, Clippers wing defense has been one of the weaknesses for that team for a really long time.
So I think what Doc does at this point is just kind of lets Paul do whatever he wants to do, and that means it's going to alternate based on possession and whatever he feels like. I'm sure Paul will want to match up a lot of times on the guy bringing up the ball, but we've seen him play off ball a little bit. So the thing is, it's not going to be one specific guy that gets Paul the whole game. I think you're going to see Paul on Bledsoe a lot. You're going to see Paul on Brandon Knight a lot if Brandon Knight ends up starting in place of Booker. Again, it's early. It's we don't even know if Booker's out yet, but I don't think it's going to be Paul locking down on one specific guy.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly how Phoenix is going to attack it too, is whichever one of those guys has the better matchup, they'll swing the ball from Bledsoe to Knight, and that'll be the guy who runs the high pick and roll up at the top of the key. So, I think that basically what they're going to do is they're going to attack them, which also I think is going to lead, the Clippers to probably have to play a little more Jamal Crawford, who's a little bit better defender than, JJ Redick is. So I think you're going to get an uptick in minutes for Crawford tonight on the other side of that as the way for them to kind of counter that action.
Anyone's matchup against Crawford still, though. I think that all those Clipper defenders are just really bad outside of Paul on the wing.
Yeah, so there are a lot of point guards, like I said. So talk to me really quick before we move on, Hefe, about percentage owned. So you got Lynn as the chalk. Is that safe to say?
I don't think so.
He better be. I mean, he's the best play. I don't know if he'll be the chalk. I think Paul is actually going to be fairly owned.
Okay.
Against Phoenix, because we know he's playing up in pace. It's just I don't think I'll have any Chris Paul personally.
I 100% agree with what Jeff just said. I think Chris Paul winds up being the chalk, and I really honestly don't love paying up for him tonight. It's not something that I've done in a lot of lineups.
Yeah, that makes no sense to me, just because if I can get like a Bledsoe Lowry, if I wanted to like pay up, that's a wicked combo in a tournament especially.
Mm-hmm.
I just want guys who can score 50 points in tournaments. I don't really play cash games in basketball, so I'm always thinking from a tournament perspective, and that's why I love Bledsoe, because when he goes ham, he can actually
he goes nuts. Yeah,
he can actually get you 60.
Yeah.
And that's like I just want to hit one GPP every week or two in basketball, and then I can lose the rest of the days. All right, let's go, man. Shooting guard. We ready, guys?
Yep.
Let's do it. So at the top of the list, projected wise, I got DeMar DeRozan. I think he's kind of the clear-cut guy, along with I like Will Barton quite a bit too. But Jeff, it's your show, man. Let's go.
I think Will Barton's going to be the chalk, and he's a pretty good player. I'm curious what Benny thinks. I think there's a really good chance on FanDuel 5,300 that he's going to go 5-6X. I think it's a really good chance. But in tournaments, we've seen Will Barton put up like offers from the field. I wrote this in my article. It's like not necessarily as scoring dependent as a Klay Thompson or a Booker, but we can see him totally flop in this situation. And with how short the slate is and everything, I think Barton's going to be super highly owned. So I'm considering fading Barton in tournaments and playing him in cash. What do you think, Benny?
Yeah, I am 100% on board with that on FanDuel. At 5,300 on FanDuel, I just think he's a little too cheap. So he's in my FanDuel cash games. But I also agree that he's probably going to be the highest owned shooting guard, because shooting guard's a position people don't normally want to spend up for. It's usually a position they save because, and we've talked about this before, shooting guards really contribute mostly in points. They don't give you a lot of rebounds, a lot of assists. There's very few that do, and the ones that do are usually the guys that we like to play because they have a safer floor than the other guys. The other guys like, Klay Thompson, like a Will Barton, if they're going to get you 35 fantasy points, it's usually 25 to 30 real life points, and then 2 or 3 assists and 2 or 3 rebounds and a steal or a block or something along those lines. That's usually the way that they wind up getting to their ceiling. So I agree. In FanDuel, I like him. I actually love DeMar DeRozan, and it has a lot more to do with watching him play the last 2 games, or the first 2 games they played this year. He's been unstoppable so far this season, and he's not your typical shooting guard. So, most shooting guards you're getting 3-pointers out of, and that's how they're getting a lot of their points. DeMar DeRozan is more of a guy with a mid-range kind of game. So he tries to get like to the top of the key, or he tries to get to like that 12 to 15-foot spot on the floor, and he's 6'7", and he can elevate. So he usually has a height advantage on a lot of the guys who are trying to guard him. So he gets to that spot on the floor and he just elevates and hits shots. Now, whether Booker's actually a little bit of a bigger guy, but if Knight is the guy who's going to be guarding him, Knight's a little bit smaller and he's going to be able to shoot over him. I think he's going to be able to do whatever he wants today. He had 32 points in one game, 40 points in the other game. So this is a guy that's given you about 5x of his value just with the points that he scores. Now, he doesn't do a ton in the other stat categories, but he'll add some assists, he'll add some rebounds, he'll get you a block or a steal or two just because he's out on the floor for so much time. So I actually really like DeRozan. My cash over on FanDuel, I went with DeRozan and Will Barton as my combination. And I actually like DeRozan a little more over on DraftKings because Barton's a little more expensive over there. So I think those are definitely the 2, best plays of the day. And then you can talk about some of the cheaper guys. If we find out that Booker's not going to play, I think Knight is like almost an automatic plug-in over there because at 5,500, he's going to get an extra 10 minutes than he's been seeing, and he's going to get a higher usage rate. So I think he goes in there. And then from there, you got to go down to some of these cheap guys. You got guys like J.J. Redick and Jamal Crawford. If you're going to take a punt, shooting guard is usually the spot where I'm going to take a cheap guy and kind of punt. So those are some of the guys on my list. I actually like Crawford more than J.J. Redick if I have to go down there, but I'm trying to avoid it if I can.
What do you think about Aaron Aflalo, 3,700 on FanDuel? Obviously, a guy who hasn't done anything this year, struggled at the end of last year. We're not seeing a ton from him, but he's a guy who can take enough shots and do enough on the court to get him around 20 FanDuel points. And when you can spend 37 on a shooting guard on a slate this small, load up the other places, is it worth it?
Yeah, I think he is one of those guys that you could use as a punt. See, the thing I like about him is he's playing the minutes. He's getting in there, he's starting, and he's also the guy that's finishing the game in there. Now, he's not a big part of the offense. The guys that are going to take the shots are going to be DeMarcus Cousins. It's going to be Rudy Gay. Those are the guys that they're actually running the offense through. But Aflalo will be out there on the floor, and, kind of just by being out there on the floor, he's going to pick up some shots. He's going to pick up some rebounds, some assists. So I think he can get you 20, but I wouldn't expect him to get you 30. That's the thing with him is, if you're using him as a salary saver to fit some guys that are more expensive in there. You're not using him because you think he's going to get you 35 points and go nuts today, because he's not.
He would be a guy that if you don't believe in the Rudy Gay resurgence, you want to roster Aflalo because Rudy Gay is probably taking more shots than he's probably averaging more shots right now than he will over the course of a season, or at least have more production right now than he will over the course of a season. So that's kind of like a little bit of a leverage play.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Now, what about Jim Minutes as a GPP kind of alternative to DeRozan? I imagine his ownership won't be as high. And, of course, he's got the dual eligibility this year on DraftKings, and he's a small forward on FanDuel.
Yeah, I like Jimmy Butler in this matchup. I like him a little more than I like D. Wade. people are
Such
going
a
to look
high
at
over under. This is your highest total of the slate as well.
Yeah, people are looking at game logs with him. The last game, all these guys on Chicago only played like 26, 27 minutes. So don't get sucked into the fact that he didn't have a great number in the last game. If he's expected to play like 33 to 35 minutes this game, which I think he will, he's going to have a number closer to the 40 plus range for his fantasy points. So I have no problem with him. He's actually on my list for top small forwards. I forgot that we can use him as a shooting guard over on DraftKings today too.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like the Chacos, when you see like DeRozan at 73 with a 45 point per game average and Jimmy minutes $300 more, averaging 36 points, no one's going to play Jimmy minutes. Like you're going to get him at like, what do you think, Jeff? 7% or lower?
Oh, really? I would have thought higher, but
I guess it's a 4-game slate. You're right. On a normal slate, but I guess everyone's going to have a little bit. But no, I'm thinking like with all the value at point guard and other positions that he's going to be a forgotten man on this slate.
Yeah, there's one small forward that everyone's going to roster. Yeah, so I'm looking on FanDuel right now, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like that Jimmy Butler is probably the second best option after TJ Warren at small forward.
Yeah, I think on small forward he makes tons of sense on FanDuel. I'm talking more on DraftKings. I don't think he'll be, very highly owned, just because of the way you can construct lineups. All right, Ben, you gonna hang
out? Yeah, he just bounced out right now.
All right, no worries. Good stuff from Benny as always. So, do you want to cover anyone else on shooting guard before we hop over to small forward officially? I know we've kind of started transitioning already, but
yeah, we kind of did, huh? No, we mentioned everyone that I wrote up and everything, so I think we can move on.
All right. The one guy I wanted to ask you is just Sean Kilpatrick on the Nets. He's got a good value score on the optimizer. What's his deal, man? Like, if you're making like tons of like slam lineups where you're just going for some serious off the wall plays on a 4-game slate, is he interesting to you at all?
Yeah, I don't even think he's wall, especially with Vasquez out now. Not that Kilpatrick's going to play a bunch of point guard minutes or anything, but just guard minutes in general freeing up is a good thing. I mean, Vasquez only played like 7 minutes the last game, I think.
Okay.
But with Kilpatrick, you can basically get 20 FanDuel points out of him, and at 4K, like that's fine. It's I don't think there's a bunch of upside in playing Kilpatrick, but maybe as a cash game punt, if you had to do that, I wouldn't hate it.
Right on. Okay, so let's move over to small forward. Again, it's like crazy with the multi-position eligibility back on DraftKings. You can go so many ways here. Like Will Barton, we just talked about him. He's back in play, at small forward at 5,700. Really good play to me on that site. But let's just concentrate on FanDuel, which I know you definitely make the majority of your money at over there. And I know a lot of people. Oh, you know what? Here's my ADD. Going back to the discussion, FanDuel versus DraftKings. Don't you think DraftKings is a little more sharp? I mean, just in general, like you get a lot more professional players over there. You get a lot more guys like depositing paychecks and just playing on FanDuel versus on DraftKings.
Maybe, yeah, that could have something to do with it. I just think that there are two different styles of players naturally. Like there's ways you want to build lineups, and that fits better on one site over the other. FanDuel is just totally different than DraftKings. I wouldn't say that more people prefer FanDuel. I don't know what the breakdown is, but there are plenty of people that prefer DraftKings too. So I don't know. I haven't really thought about that a ton, but I guess that makes some sense. That
I think it's always easier to construct lineups on FanDuel, and I think they want it to be that way. Like that's why they do one pitcher versus two. They want it to be in football. They want it to mirror as close to a normal fantasy football thing as possible, and that's why they leave stupid kickers. But that's another story for another day. So, yeah, I'm all over the place. We already know this. Welcome to my world. Let's move back to small forward, in which, to me, the number one guy as far as projected points. Let me see if we agree. So, who's your number one guy as far as projected points? I have Jimmy Butler. Not even close. And then my next is going to be Gallinari over Gay, believe it or not.
Really? Yeah, I think in terms of raw points, it would be Butler, then Gay, then TJ Warren, then Gallinari. And then since TJ Warren is such a discount over those other guys, I think that he's just going to be ridiculously highly owned. He's not a secret at this point anymore. 38.7 his last game, 44.3 the game before that, playing a bunch of minutes. It's just his usage rate is like 24-25 this year, which there's plenty of room for. Yeah, it's super high, and there's plenty of room for regression in it though, because he was at like 19% last year. So not that this year's usage rate has to be the same as last year, but 25 is too high for him, I think. So I think he's going to regress quite a bit, but is he going to regress to the point where he's not going to score close to 30 FanDuel points? Like, probably not. He's probably going to score around 30 FanDuel points at least, but 30 FanDuel points at 5,500 isn't like a have to have TJ Warren. So I think he makes for a pretty good fade in tournaments, but a must play auto play in cash games.
And what about Rondé Hollis Jefferson as a punt? Like, he's getting 24 minutes a game and not doing anything with him production wise, but that's kind of like the McJester special. Like, you know, like if you're looking at game logs and expecting to win GPPs by like just playing game logs, you're going to lose. Like, I really respect the hell out of McJester because like he'll look at someone's game log and be like, he'll just see the complete opposite of what the masses see. You know, like, oh, this guy's playing 23 minutes. He's due more for a 22-point outing, and he's at 3,600. So any interest there at all?
So McJester is one of the great GPP players that there is.
Yep.
No doubt. He is very good at kind of ignoring numbers and just figuring out. He basically, the way I understand it, I've had a few conversations with the guy. I'm not going to pretend to know his whole process, but I believe he basically looks at the player and it has a value in his head of what the player is, and then looks at his salary and goes, okay, this guy's too cheap. You know, he's not like a projections guy from what.
Nope, not at all.
I understand. So yeah, that's a good call on this being a McJester type of player. My problem is when I'm looking in my head and look at Hollis Jefferson and the value he presents, I'm not thinking, oh man, this is a good player. So
right.
I know that the projection model actually likes him, I believe. So, you know, that's
and it
one
must
thing.
be a minutes thing, you know, that even if he gets, you know, half a point per minute, like, well, no, that's terrible. But he really should be. Yeah, that's really bad. I wonder what he is points per minute. But it's kind of interesting for me just to get into this basketball talk because, like, as you know, like, I really do like basketball. I know the game really well. It's just when you're just so deep into football, it's hard. So I gotta commend you for being able to be this on top of both. That's pretty.
You
awesome.
know the trick, man?
Well,
No
not
sleep.
sleep.
Yes.
I thought you were going to say cocaine. Yeah, one of the two.
One of the two or both, but
That's right.
only
There
one.
you
For
go.
me.
That's Tommy G. We'll talk about that another day.
So 0.8 FanDuel points per minute is what Hollis Jefferson was at last year. Run that through real quick. Was he playing 24 minutes?
Yeah, on average. Yep.
I mean, I don't want to do that in my head and embarrass myself.
18, I think it is.
19.2. So yeah, that's okay. If you project him to be at 19 points, that's fine.
Yeah, it would just be to go stars and scrubs in tournament.
Exactly.
Which is what I do a lot, especially on FanDuel. Like he was talking about shooting guard. Like that's usually my tact at small forward is, you know, like Terrence Ross and Tom, you know, this guy Jefferson, and then just go absolutely huge at the rest of the positions, you know.
Sure, yeah, I think that's a fair approach in general. I think that I would prefer, I don't know. I guess he's about the same as a Flalo, like same type of thing. So. And
you got Matt Barnes down there as well, who's at least getting minutes. He's not real sexy. He can once in a while, like when he gets hot from three, he can really exceed expectation for a tournament. But you want to talk about a large standard deviation of a player, like he's got a range from like 5 to 35 a night.
He really does. A lot of it has to do with him just being a totally unselfish player. Like, you know, he's not ever looking for his own shot or anything. It's just he'll take the open shots. He'll pass when it's not there. And it's great for basketball. It sucks for daily fantasy basketball. But I'm with you. I like Matt Barnes a bit more than Hollis Jefferson, though. He's 700 more, so that's a big difference. But I do think Matt Barnes is a much better player than Hollis Jefferson. Not much better, a little better player than Hollis Jefferson. So that would be the guy I look at instead.
Fair enough. All right, have we done enough on small forward, do you think, for the peeps?
How about just one more?
Please.
Bojan Bogdanovic, if anyone watched Olympic basketball, you understand that like this guy is a ridiculous talent compared to most of the world. It comes over to the NBA and it's like, borderline starter maybe. So it's kind of funny, but like this guy is a legit awesome shooter, a legit great scorer. It's a matter of if he can stay on the floor with his defense and stuff. But I think he is one of the best GPP plays of the day. Bogdanovic has, we saw it in his last game. This is game log watching, but 36.6 FanDuel points in his last game. If you could get anything close to that at 4.3K, you're doing well.
Very well. Very well. I like that a lot. And I just put him in a lineup. All right. I am making lineups as we talk. So I'm going to have this be like the elite live lineup. I'm putting in the 333. Okay. So
there you go.
I'll report back and let you know how this goes.
Do I get a cut of this one?
You do not get anything. No.
Oh, man. Well, I still got that Jeremy Lin money coming in, so I'm happy.
It's true. True. Oh, yeah, this is going to be a bad night for me. All right. I do have Vikings defense everywhere, so I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Good play. I like the Vikings defense.
All right. Power forward time. Looking first, like I like to do, just who is the projected guy. Like if we didn't have any, dollar values to worry about, it's clearly Blake Griffin. I'm a Blake Mark. You don't know this about me because we haven't really talked basketball until this year, but I generally play Blake Griffin almost every time, for better or worse. So talk to me about Blake today. Do I want to put him in my lineup like I always do?
Yeah, I like him up in pace here. The Clipper game, I believe, is the one with the highest spread. Yeah, it's 11.5. The other ones are either 6 or 7 point spread. So it's the most concerning, especially considering the favorite is at home. When you get a favorite on the road, it's a little less concerning because they're less likely to be blowouts. So there's that, but that's not like a killer. You can still play Blake Griffin here. You can still play your Suns. You can still play your other Sixers. I think he's in play with Millsap for cash games. I think you probably have one or the other. And I think that Millsap, while his upside certainly is nowhere near Blake Griffin's, has a little bit higher of a floor. Minutes are a little bit concerning early on in the year. He played in one blowout that, of course, like he wasn't going to get the minutes in. But then the other game also, he only played 31 minutes, I believe. I could pull that up right now, too. But he's just, 31 minutes. But he's just a guy that for the last 2 years, cash game players have relied on almost every game he played. They just plug in Paul Millsap because he's Mr. Consistency. And he gets this matchup against Sacramento that is good for him as well. So I'm thinking about starting my cash game lineups with him at power forward and just passing on Blake Griffin. But Blake Griffin's certainly the better GPP play.
Yep, I guess point per dollar, Millsap definitely looks to be the play because, they're very, very close as far as an outward projection, which makes Blake maybe a little bit sexier in GPPs because he'll probably be a tad less owned. And, God, when you say less owned on a 4-game slate, people keep in mind, like, everyone's owned. Like, there's just there's no way to get too fancy. You just kind of have to hit the nuts at all the positions to take down a tournament. Then you got the Nicolas. So you got Jokic and Mirotic I'm probably not seeing either one of those that well.
That was pretty good.
All right. They're actually next online as far as the optimizer is concerned at the projection, at the position. So is that where you're going next to kind of complement one of those two high-priced guys?
If you're a Blake Griffin mark, I'm a Nikola Jokic mark, dude.
Okay.
This guy is one of the most underrated players in all of basketball. Ridiculous talent, ridiculous upside. European guy that you can basically run an offense through and have a really good offense. Problem is he does stupid things like in Europe and in the Olympics and everything. If there's ever any sort of fast break at all, the European player will stop the guy at half court and just automatically foul him. And Jokic still does that kind of stuff. Like And he has a really good coach. I guarantee you Mike Malone is telling him, hey, don't do that. And he's still doing
Hey,
that.
don't
So,
do that.
yeah. And so Jokic will get in foul trouble out of nowhere and just be on the bench. And what Mike Malone does too is when these players get in foul trouble early in the game, sometimes they don't come back later in the game. He just gives up on them because the other guys, gets hot or whatever. It's they rotate a lot between Jokic and Nurkic together this year, but a lot of times you'll see just one of those guys in the lineup, and it's whoever's hotter. Last game it was Jokic, and Nurkic sat much of the second half. But all of that said, I think the Jokic is essentially one of the best GPP plays you could ever play every slate while he's this price. I played him all the time last year, won me a bunch of money. I'll be playing him all the time this year while he's 6,100 on FanDuel. That's 6,100 for a guy who can legitimately get you close to 50 FanDuel points. Well, he got 55 last game, so that shows you.
So he seems like way more of a FanDuel play because he's $7K on DraftKings on a $50,000 cap versus, like you said, 61 on a 60. So you really got to like
way more
him over there on FanDuel. Now on DraftKings, Mirotic and the highest over-under game of the day is only 4,700. Both he and Fareed offer some power forward value there. Now they're both, again, we're getting into that volatile thing, but that's kind of the NBA. I mean, everyone who says it's like, oh, you just play the players. I mean, give me a break. That's at the high end. You have consistency. These kind of players generally all over the board. So any interest in Mirotic or Fareed at 4,700 on DraftKings?
Don't have a ton of interest in Fareed, though he has gotten off to a really nice start to the season. I do like Mirotic and the way he rates out in our projection model. He rates out pretty highly there. Of course, the game total there is attractive. I think that's going to be a really nice game to get exposure to, which is why I also like Taj Gibson. Taj Gibson is also playing in that game and is a little more consistent, like you're talking about, not being able to have the consistency with those two players. I think Taj will give you a little more consistency in that range.
Yeah, 25 and 28 minutes for Taj. No Pau Gasol. Like, see, I'm still like, just wrapping my head around people being in other places, Jeff. Like, because last year it was like, oh, Pau's out. Taj was a lock and load. Remember that? Like, he'd be 60, 70% owned. So why is he not a for sure play, lock and load at 5,100? Like, who is taking the minutes away from Taj now if Pau Gasol is gone?
Well, I mean, Mirotic a little bit.
Right, he was there last year. So why?
Robin Lopez is the new guy. Robin Lopez.
Okay.
Yeah, but still, all of that said, Taj Gibson is essentially the same value play was last year when Powell was out. Like he's an undervalued guy right now that people should be playing.
Okay, good stuff. I like that play a lot, man. Just because that game it's going to be a track meet. It looks like so. All right. So, do you want to move on to the center position, or is there anybody else? I mean, I know you got Trevor Booker's been playing really good, getting a lot of minutes. You got Mo Spates is like a GPP flyer. Like if it were to blow out, Spates could end up getting some run in that at 3,700. But I'm not sure there's a need to go there tonight at this position.
So Spates is a guy that I'm not going to be super high on right now. He is a super high usage guy in blowouts, and if it's not going to be a blowout, then he's going to be lower. Yeah, so he's probably not going to get a bunch of minutes, probably not going to have super high usage. So I don't think that this is the right spot for him. And the only reason I didn't write up Booker or anything is just because I think he's way overperforming, and typically when players overperform, they're overowned. And I hope I'm not wrong in this, and Booker doesn't come out as like 5% owned or something, but assuming Booker is going to be one of the more popular guys, it's a good time to be on the good time to fade him, I think.
Good stuff. All right. So as far as power forward, we like Millsap and cash games, just to kind of surmise. Definitely like some Mirotic and Gibson and Jokic, but especially him on FanDuel.
Exactly, and you can use Griffin and GPPs too.
And Griffin on GPPs, definitely. All right, so on the center position, my man, Boogie Cousins. Love this guy. Love everything about him. Going into Atlanta now, I know Dwight Howard is definitely one of the better post defenders, even in his older age, and I know DeMarcus doesn't have great games against him in the past. So are we paying up $10,800 on DraftKings for DeMarcus on the road? I also worry about him just being like a psychopath and getting a couple quick fouls with Dwight, because Dwight's annoying, and I could see him kind of getting him under his skin.
And annoying is the perfect word for Dwight Howard. I'm not a Dwight Howard fan.
No, me neither.
So DraftKings, especially with what we discussed with Benny at the beginning of the show and how rosters should be constructed over there, a little more balanced. I don't think you have to play DeMarcus Cousins over there on FanDuel at 9,900. You probably want to play Boogie Cousins. Like, that's the number one guy that I'm interested in paying up for. People are going to look at the pace as a downgrade here against Atlanta, with Dwight Howard slowing the pace down for any team he plays for, basically. But slow pace isn't bad for Boogie. It'll get him some looks down in the post, just like he always gets, and you're going to see him do some work, I think. You look at the other couple of games he played at projected slow paces, and he was fine, right? San Antonio, 58.2, and then Minnesota, 42.4. Like, those are good games for him. Against Phoenix in the fast-paced game, 33.2. So I like Cousins here, not worried about the pace, and I think he's one of the best guys to spend up on.
Yeah, man, I just love how he's hitting his free throws, too. I mean, he's always been good free throw shooter, or decent for a center, but, man, he's 12 for 16, 14 for 16, and 11 for 14, man. When you got a guy like that who gets to the line that much, who's converting his free throws, that's just gravy for fantasy. I love that. He's also only had 7 and 6 rebounds in 2 games. You got to feel like that's more on the low side of his output. So, yeah, man, he's as good of a bet as 50 points as anyone on the slate, for sure. I think people kind of overrate matchups with these superstars, especially in basketball. Like, I mean, how many times did we say, oh, this is a bad matchup for Durant? He just goes and drops like 70 fantasy points on someone. So.
Yeah, he's like super matchup proof. Same thing with Cousins. You don't have to worry too much about the matchup. It's a lot about game style and how you think the teams are going to defend him. And I think that Atlanta's not going to be able to stop Cousins with the personnel they have.
Fair enough. Jonas Valanciunas has been playing his ass off and still comes at a really good price tag. I mean, $6,400 on FanDuel. So if you're going to come off of Boogie on FanDuel, is that your man?
Absolutely. We know that big men against Denver is a good place to go to. It's a good matchup for them. So Valanciunas is a guy that just since the playoffs has been playing incredible basketball. He's had double-doubles his first 2 games. He had 32 actual points in his first game against Detroit. So this is a guy that definitely is a nice pivot option in tournaments off of Cousins, though I like Cousins in tournaments as well. But, yeah, if you're building multiple lineups, I wouldn't mind mixing up Cousins and Valanciunas quite a bit.
And is DeAndre Jordan still priced like Blake Griffin is hurt? Because, like, to me, like, again, it's kind of like the Taj. It was more like, okay, if Blake's out, I want all the DeAndre. But when Blake's in, and also for Blake too, I don't think Blake is as sexy when DeAndre's in, because he takes away from his rebounding upside. So he really hasn't played great this year, only 25 points per game. But this is a guy who can get you 50 points, and he's sitting at 7,200. So are we having any shares of DeAndre tonight?
I don't love him in this matchup. I think, it's just with Cousins and Valanciunas out. Like, why would you pay more money for Jordan over Valanciunas? Like,
pure percentage, because I'm assuming he's going to be like very low owned. But yeah, you're right. Like, no logical reason other than percentage.
And the percentages too would just have to be absurd for that to make sense still. So I don't love it.
Fair enough. And then is there any player value now? Like, I know I played Justin Hamilton last game. He was like 30. I want to say, what was he, like 3,600, and he got us 21 points. So I was like, I was satisfied with that.
The thing that hurts him is that Brook Lopez is back. He was out the last game, so Hamilton was a better play. But I believe Lopez is playing today, and he actually faces off against his brother. It's the brothers Lopez matchup. So
interesting.
Robin is actually the better play in this game at 5,300. I think Brook Lopez is just a really bad defender. So I would take Robin Lopez in this matchup if I was building a bunch of lineups. But I mean, it would certainly
if you
have
had to choose a Lopez, it would be Robin.
It would be Robin, and it would be a lot of lineups. Like I'm talking 15, 20 lineups before I got there.
Sideshow Bob.
Yeah, Sideshow Bob. That's right. And Nurkic.
All
Nurkic
right.
is the only other guy I would mention. He's pretty similar to Jokic. They both are high upside guys and can alternate which one is going to have the great game. They don't typically go off in the same game, so keep that in mind. Don't necessarily play them together unless you're looking to hedge. But yeah, I think Nurkic is a decent play as well.
That's an interesting thing that you said that about them not going off together, because I do like to game stack, especially over on FanDuel in tournaments. So, you get that double OT kind of a scenario where it can really pay off. I've seen it happen quite a bit. That's interesting that you said that those two guys don't really correlate well. So, this is why I am the host and you are the analyst, because I didn't even know fucking Sideshow Bob was on that team. So that is
I don't sleep, man. I told you, I don't sleep.
Right? So anything else you want to leave the folks with before we sign off for the day? We're at an hour and 8 minutes, so I think we have banged this out properly.
Oh, man, you all got your money's worth. This is the last free show. If you like watching these shows, you think it's good, you think you're making money, you've got to get an NBA subscription. This is the last day to get the early bird deal. Otherwise, it goes up to paying full price, not getting the 45% discount. So
yeah, the Magic Sports Donkey won't always be here. It'll be Rad Dad, Tommy, and Benny as well. So, but then once football ends, I will be full bore into NBA, and I'll come back on here and impress you with all my knowledge, Jeff.
Awesome. I thought you did well, man.
All right, I appreciate it, man. So good luck tonight, Jeff, and good luck to the Elite Mafia. And with that, I will sign off.
All right.